I was always the invisible one in the family. My brother Jason was the golden child. Ever since we were kids, he was the one who got all the attention. He was the star athlete, the charming one, the one who could do no wrong. And then there was me. I was the quiet, bookish girl, the one who stayed in the background and tried to make everyone proud. But no matter how hard I tried, it always seemed like I was just there, not really seen. Growing up, I understood that Jason was the priority. Our parents made it clear, in subtle ways, that he was their focus. His college fund? Fully covered. My college fund? Non-existent. My parents didn't even seem to care that I was accepted into a good university. All they talked about was how much Jason had accomplished, how his future was set. I remember the day Jason got his college acceptance letter. Mom and Dad were ecstatic. They threw a huge party. Everyone congratulated him. I was happy for him, sure, but a part of me felt like I had been overlooked again. I'd worked just as hard, if not harder. I had earned my spot at that school, too, but I didn't get the same celebration. I didn't even get the same recognition. That night, while everyone was toasting to Jason's future, I slipped away to my room and cried. It wasn't about the party. It was about something deeper, something I had known for years. I was never going to be enough for them. And I couldn't stand it anymore. When Jason left for college, my parents barely acknowledged the fact that I was still there, still struggling. They didn't pay attention to the fact that I was trying to juggle 2 part-time jobs and a full course load. They didn't notice how hard it was for me to keep up with tuition, books, and living expenses. They didn't care. It was all about Jason. But that was going to change. I had a plan. I wasn't just going to accept being invisible anymore. I was going to make them notice me, and I was going to do it in the most unforgettable way. I had always been a hard worker, but I learned quickly that being good enough wasn't always enough. I watched as Jason spent his time partying and living the college experience, while I was stuck working 2 jobs and studying until late at night, barely getting enough sleep. My grades were good, but not stellar like Jason's. I didn't have the luxury of living in a dorm or joining clubs. I was just trying to survive. My parents called me once, a few weeks into the semester, to see how I was doing. Of course, the conversation was all about Jason's success, how he was thriving in his new college life, how he was getting straight A's, how he was excelling in everything. They barely asked about me. I wasn't sure if it was the hurt I was feeling or just the exhaustion, but I couldn't take it anymore. I let out a sigh that I didn't mean to release. "Are you okay, honey?" Mom asked, her voice sweet but distant, like she was already thinking about Jason's next achievement. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, trying to hide the frustration in my voice. But I knew she didn't hear it. They never heard it. That night, I sat in my small dorm room, staring at the phone in my hand. The weight of everything felt unbearable. I couldn't understand how my parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, could be so blind to the fact that I was struggling. It wasn't just the financial burden. It was the emotional toll, the feeling of being unimportant, of never measuring up. But then, something snapped inside me. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was just sheer exhaustion. I wasn't going to let this go on forever. I wasn't going to let my parents continue to ignore me. I was done being the shadow in my own family. I remember exactly what I did next. I started making a plan. I was going to show them all, that I wasn't just the quiet, invisible girl they thought they could overlook. I was going to do something that would make them look at me, really look at me, and see who I had become. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. Graduation was coming up fast. Jason was already talking about what he would wear to the ceremony, about what he wanted for his graduation gift. I didn't even know if my parents were planning to attend mine. They'd never really shown any interest in my achievements, so I wasn't sure why this would be any different, but it didn't matter. I was going to make them come. I was going to make them see. And that's when the idea hit me. It wasn't about the ceremony itself. It wasn't about walking across the stage to receive my diploma. It was about making a statement. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. Not my parents, not Jason, and certainly not anyone who had ever doubted me. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I'd spent years trying to make my parents proud, trying to fit into the mold they'd created for me. Now I was going to break free from it. I was going to do something that would leave them speechless. The weeks leading up to graduation were a whirlwind. I spent most of my time juggling last-minute assignments, preparing for final exams, and sorting through everything that needed to be done before the big day. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking about one thing: my plan. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't just walk across that stage like everyone else. No, I needed to make an impact. It wasn't just about the recognition anymore. It was about control. My parents had controlled my life for so long: how I should act, how I should think, what I should be. It was time to take back some of that power. It was time for them to see who I was, to understand the sacrifices I had made, and to feel the weight of their own actions. I started gathering information. I did some research, figured out the logistics of the graduation ceremony, and began to plan every detail down to the last second. I knew I had to make sure everything would go smoothly. If there was even the slightest mistake, my moment would be ruined, and I couldn't afford that. Not after everything I had been through. One of the first things I did was book an appointment with the university's financial office. I'd heard about a small fund that was available for students who had financial struggles. It wasn't much, but I thought maybe it could help me with some last-minute expenses, especially since I knew I wasn't going to ask my parents for a penny. I didn't need their help. Not anymore. As I walked into the office, I felt a sense of pride. I wasn't just some girl from the background anymore. I was someone who had figured things out on her own. They handed me the form to apply for the fund, and I filled it out right there. I could already imagine the look on my parents' faces when they saw that I had done this all by myself. They'd never expected this from me, and that was exactly the point. When I got back to my dorm that night, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The day I had been planning for was getting closer, and everything had to be perfect. But there was one last thing I needed to do. I had to make sure Jason was there. He had been calling me less and less as the years went by. It wasn't that we weren't close, it's just that his life had taken over. I understood, but I couldn't help but feel abandoned. The truth was, I didn't need his approval, but I wanted him there. He was my brother, and despite everything, I still cared about him. This wouldn't be complete without him witnessing what I was about to do. I texted him that night a simple message. "Hey, you coming to my graduation?" It took him a while to reply. I stared at my phone, waiting, until finally the message came through. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it. Can't believe it's already here." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. At least he was coming. I didn't want to do this without him there. But deep down, I knew he had no idea what was coming. Neither did my parents. They thought it would be just like every other graduation, ordinary, routine, and easy to forget. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had worked too hard, fought too many silent battles to let this day pass without leaving my mark. The days flew by, and soon it was the night before graduation. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of calm. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was ready. I could hear my parents in the living room of our tiny apartment talking about how proud they were of Jason. The usual conversation, the usual praise. and I could feel that familiar sting in my chest. But tonight, I wasn't going to let it bother me. I wasn't going to be that girl anymore. I wasn't going to be the one they could ignore or push aside. Tomorrow, I would show them who I was. The next morning, I got up early, put on my cap and gown, and stood in front of the mirror again. This was it. I was finally going to be seen. I knew they would be there in the crowd, watching me walk across that stage. They would be expecting nothing more than the usual, just another student collecting her diploma. But they were wrong. I checked my phone once more. Jason had sent a message saying he'd be there in an hour. It was time to go. As I walked toward C, the venue, the nerves I had felt a few weeks ago were gone. This wasn't just any graduation. This was my moment. I had worked for this. I had bled for it. And now I was about to make them all understand. When I entered the auditorium, I could already hear the murmurs of the crowd, the families, the friends, the professors, all eagerly awaiting the ceremony to begin. I found my seat and tried to calm my breathing, but I couldn't. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Power. I glanced around. My parents were sitting in the audience scanning. The program for Jason, they didn't even know I was already there, but they would soon. They would see me, really see me, in a way they never had before. The ceremony began, and I could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on me as I stood with the other graduates. The sound of the choir filled the air, and I could almost hear the echoes of my parents' voices from years ago, telling me to always do my best to make them proud. I had spent so much of my life trying to meet their expectations, only to be left in the shadows. Today, that would change. I stood a little taller, my shoulders back, as the procession moved forward. The graduates in front of me walked one by one to the stage. I knew that, to everyone else, this was just another graduation, another day for the students to celebrate their achievements. But to me, it felt like the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had endured, everything I had sacrificed. As I waited for my name to be called, my eyes drifted to the crowd. My parents were sitting in the middle section, trying to get comfortable. I could tell by the way they were looking around that they hadn't yet noticed me. Jason was with them, his usual easygoing self, chatting away about some sports game. They didn't even realize I was standing there, just another face in the crowd. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, frustration, excitement, but most of all, I felt calm. For once, I wasn't scared. I was finally in control of the situation. I was about to change the narrative. Next, we have Sarah Williams. The announcer's voice rang out, and my heart skipped a beat. I stepped forward, my hands trembling only slightly. As I approached the stage, I caught a glimpse of Jason, in the crowd, his eyes scanning the program again. And then he looked up, and for the first time he saw me. I could see the recognition hit him. His face lit up for a brief moment before his expression faltered. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. My parents, too, looked up at me, their faces blank for a second. Their smiles faltered, and I could almost see the wheels turning in their heads. What was I doing up here? I reached the microphone and the crowd grew silent. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had been planning for weeks, was finally here. Before I take my diploma, I began, my voice calm but steady. I want to say something. The murmurs spread through the crowd. I could feel the eyes on me, the curiosity building. It was exactly what I wanted. I'm Sarah Williams, I continued, my voice growing louder now, more confident. And I'm the person who worked 2 jobs to get here. I'm the one who studied late at night while everyone else was out partying. I'm the one who fought tooth and nail for every opportunity I had. But none of that mattered. Because for years, the people who were supposed to love me, to support me, didn't even notice me. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in. My parents' faces were a mix of confusion and shock. Jason, still sitting with them, looked bewildered, his mouth slightly open. It was perfect. I stepped closer to the microphone, letting the silence stretch for a moment. My heart pounded, but I refused to let fear creep back in. I had their attention now. For years, I watched as you poured all your love, all your support into Jason. You paid for his tuition, his books, his dorm. You celebrated every little victory he had. But you didn't do that for me. You didn't see the sacrifices I made, the struggles I faced to get here. You didn't even care. I could feel the tension in the air. The audience was on the edge of their seats, but I wasn't finished. This was the moment where everything would change. But today, I want you all to know that I didn't need your help. I didn't need your support to get here. I made it on my own. I took a breath, looking directly at my parents. The shock was evident on their faces now. The anger that had been bubbling inside me for years, the hurt I had carried in silence, was spilling out in front of everyone. And to make sure you never forget this moment, I've arranged something for you. A cold smile spread across my face as I glanced over at the back of the auditorium, where I had made a few special arrangements. I had been planning this for weeks, and now it was time for the final part of my plan. Suddenly, the screen behind me flickered on, and a video began to play. It was a montage of moments from my life, the times I had been overlooked, the times I had struggled, the times I had worked without recognition. But then it showed something different. It showed the day I found out Jason's tuition had been paid, while mine had been completely ignored. It showed the emails I had sent to my parents, asking for help, and how they had been ignored or brushed aside. It showed the countless hours I had worked just to make ends meet. I watched my parents' faces as they realized what was happening. The color drained from their faces. The video was playing all the ugly truths they had ignored. Jason was frozen, his eyes wide as the reality of everything I had said hit him. My parents couldn't even look at me anymore. The audience was dead, silent, the room filled with a strange energy. This wasn't just a graduation speech. This was my moment of reckoning. This was my revenge. I want to make one thing clear, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of triumph and fury. I'm not your second choice anymore. I'm not the invisible child you can overlook. I'm Sarah Williams, and I'm done being forgotten, with Phi. That, I walked off the stage, leaving behind a stunned and speechless crowd. As I walked off the stage, I could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on me. The silence in the auditorium was almost deafening. I didn't dare turn around to look at my parents or Jason. I didn't need to see their faces, because I already knew what they looked like. They were stunned, speechless, unable to process what had just happened. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. I remember walking back to my seat, my heart pounding in my chest, my legs shaky but firm beneath me. The cheers and applause had been replaced with whispers and murmurs, a room full of people still processing what I had just said. I wasn't sure if they were applauding the courage it took, or just trying to grasp the unexpected twist. But I didn't care. I had done what I came to do. When the ceremony finally ended, I gathered my things and made my way out of the auditorium. My hands were trembling, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the adrenaline that was still coursing through my veins. I had just exposed everything I had been hiding, everything I had been feeling for years. And now, there was no turning back. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath. The air felt fresher than it had in years. For the first time, I felt a sense of freedom. I had done it. I had stood up for myself in a way I never thought possible. And now, I was no longer the quiet, invisible girl. But my moment of triumph didn't last long. Before I could get very far, I heard a voice calling my name. Sarah! It was Jason. He was running toward me, his face pale, his expression conflicted. I stopped walking, waiting for him to catch up. He was breathing heavily, clearly shaken by what had happened. When he reached me, he stopped, looking at me with a mix of confusion and something else. Guilt, maybe? What the hell was that? He asked, his voice low but full of emotion. I could see the hurt in his eyes, and a part of me felt guilty for doing this to him. He wasn't the one who had ignored me all these years. But then I remembered. He was just as blind as our parents. He had been the golden child, the one who had been showered with love and attention, while I had been left behind. He hadn't noticed the pain I had endured. He hadn't seen how much I had given up to get to this point. I had to do it, Jason, I said quietly. I couldn't let you or them keep ignoring me. Jason opened his mouth to say something, but he stopped himself. He looked like he was searching for the right words, but the truth was, I didn't think there were any right words. Not after everything I had just laid bare. Sarah, I had no idea, he said softly. I didn't know it was that bad. I nodded, my throat tight. You never asked. No one ever did. There was a long silence between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, or even if it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had finally been seen, and no one could take that away from me now. Jason seemed to wrestle with his thoughts for a moment before speaking again. I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't know how much you were going through. I should have paid attention. I should have been there for you. I felt a mix of emotions at his words. Part of me wanted to forgive him right there and then, to let go of the anger I had held onto for so long. But another part of me wanted to hold on to the satisfaction of knowing that I had finally forced him to see me, truly see me. It's too late for apologies, I said, my voice shaking slightly, but this time with a sense of resolve. But I appreciate it. You'll never understand what it was like for me, but at least now you know. Jason didn't respond right away, his eyes downcast. I wasn't sure what he was feeling, and honestly, I didn't care. I had done what I needed to do, and now I was free from the burden of pretending. The conversation was interrupted when my parents approached us. They had clearly been talking to someone, probably one of the professors or a family friend. But when they saw me, they stopped in their tracks. The look on their faces was one of disbelief, confusion, and, if I was being honest, guilt. Sarah, we need to talk, my mother said, her voice shaky. I met her gaze, feeling nothing but cold indifference. I don't think there's anything left to say. My father stepped forward, his expression softening as he looked at me. Honey, we didn't realize. We never meant to hurt you. I almost laughed. You didn't mean to. You never even cared. Enough to realize how much I was hurting. It wasn't the response they expected. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father looked as if he had been slapped. For the first time in my life, I didn't care. Sarah, please, my father started. But I cut him off. Save it. I'm done. I turned to walk away, but something inside me made me pause. I looked back at them, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your love. I've spent my whole life trying to earn it, but now I'm done. I did this for me, and you'll never be able to take that away from me. With that, I turned and walked away. It wasn't the closure I had always imagined, but it was enough. I had finally freed myself from the weight of their neglect, from the burden of being invisible. And as I left that day, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The days following graduation were a blur. I didn't have a clear plan for what came next. All I knew was that I was done being the invisible daughter, done being the one no one acknowledged. My parents' apology didn't matter anymore, and Jason's guilt was fleeting. The damage had been done. But in the chaos of emotions and the new sense of freedom, I realized something important. I was finally in control of my own life. It wasn't easy to cut ties, at least emotionally, with my family. For years, I had been clinging to the hope that one day they'd see me, really see me. But that hope had evaporated the moment I stepped off that stage. There was no going back. No turning to them for approval, no hoping for their recognition. And for the first time, I felt at peace with that. I found a small apartment near the university, a modest space. But it was mine. I didn't need anything extravagant. Just a place where I could breathe. A place where I could begin building the life I had been denied for so long. The first few weeks were hard. I wasn't prepared for how lonely it would feel. For so many years, I had lived in the shadow of my family. And now, for the first time, I had to figure out who I was without them. It felt like I was learning how to live all over again. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. I threw myself into my work. I found a full-time job at a local marketing firm, doing what I had studied for all these years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. One night, about a month after graduation, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the courage it took to stand up in front of everyone, to finally speak my truth. I had no idea how the crowd had reacted, or what anyone else had thought about what I said, but I knew one thing for sure. It had changed something inside me. I had taken control of my life, and nothing would be the same again. I didn't reach out to my family after graduation. I wasn't sure I ever would, but that didn't mean I didn't think about them. My mom had tried calling a few times, but I never answered. The message was clear. I was no longer the girl they could ignore, and they needed to understand that. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about my own growth. I needed space. I needed to figure out who I was without them holding me back. Jason reached out a couple of weeks after the ceremony. His message was simple. I miss you. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. Part of me wanted to forgive him. He was my brother, after all. But another part of me, the part that had spent years being pushed aside, felt like it wasn't enough. He didn't get it. He had never really seen me. The golden child never had to fight for attention. The golden child never had to work twice, as hard just to be noticed. But I thought about it. I thought about all the moments he and I had shared growing up. I thought about the times we'd laughed together, the memories of a time when things were simpler. So I replied, "We need to talk." A week later, we met at a coffee shop. It was awkward at first. I didn't know what to say, and he didn't seem to know where to start. He sat across from me, running his fingers through his hair, looking tired but hopeful. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said finally. "I was an idiot. I took everything for granted. I took you for granted." I looked at him. "You don't get it, Jason. You never did. You were always the one they cared about, the one who got everything. I was always second. And for years, I had to watch you live the life I wanted, but they never saw me." "I know," he said softly. "I had no idea. I thought everything was fine. I didn't know how bad it was for you." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough to undo the years of neglect, the years of hurt that had built up inside me. I've spent my whole life fighting for recognition, Jason. Fighting for attention that should have been mine. And you know what? I'm tired. I'm done fighting for a place in their lives. He nodded, his eyes downcast. I understand. I do. And I'm so sorry. There was a long pause, and I realized something important in that moment. I didn't need his apology to move on. I didn't need him to fix everything. What I needed was to stop looking for validation from my family, from anyone. I needed to learn to validate myself. And that's what I was doing now. "I'm not going back, Jason," I said, my voice steady. "I'm building my own life, and I'm going to be okay without them." He reached across the table, placing his hand on mine. "I'll always be here for you, Sarah. I know I screwed up, but I want to be a better brother." I smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had forgiven everything. It was the smile of someone who had found peace with her past, with the person she had become. "I'm glad," I said softly, "but I need to do this on my own." And that was the moment I realized everything had changed. I wasn't the girl who had been invisible for years. I wasn't the girl who had fought for recognition. I was someone new now, someone stronger, someone who didn't need anyone's approval to know her worth. As I walked away from that coffee shop, I felt a sense of finality, a sense of freedom. I had taken back control of my life, and no one could take that away from me. It's strange how quickly life can change when you stop waiting for permission. I had spent so many years in the shadow of my family's expectations, bending myself into a version of what they wanted me to be. But once I broke free, I realized how much of myself I had lost in the process. The Sarah they saw wasn't me. The girl I had become wasn't even a reflection of who I truly was. She was a version of me that fit their narrative. But now, I was finding out who I was meant to be. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. No one else. I had taken the plunge into the unknown, and while it hadn't been easy, I knew it was the best decision I'd ever made. It wasn't just about cutting ties with my family. It was about finding peace within myself. It was about no longer allowing other people's judgments and expectations to define who I was. I had been invisible for so long, waiting for someone to notice me, to see my worth. But I'd learned something that would stay with me forever. I didn't need anyone else to see me. I had to see myself first. I threw myself into my job with a renewed sense of purpose. The work wasn't groundbreaking, but it was enough to get by. And I was finally at a place where I could feel proud of what I was doing. I was no longer working just to survive. I was working to build something, to create a future for myself that was entirely my own. The first few months were challenging. I had moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. Sometimes, I would catch myself thinking about my parents, about how they would have reacted to me standing up for myself in front of all those people. But then, I would remind myself, I didn't need their approval. I was enough without it. There were times when I would get home from work and feel the weight of everything bearing down on me. That's when I would grab my journal and write down my thoughts. Writing became my outlet, a place where I could pour out all the emotions that I hadn't been able to express for years. Slowly, I began to realize that I was healing. The anger I had held onto for so long started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was time to move forward. About 6 months after graduation, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in a coffee shop, working on a project for work, when I ran into an old friend from school, Lena. She had been one of the few people who had been kind to me during those years of invisibility. Lena had always made an effort to include me, to show me that I mattered. We had lost touch after graduation, but when she saw me sitting there, she practically ran over to me. "Sarah! Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's you," she said, her eyes lighting up. I smiled, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through me. It was like a little reminder that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. "Hey, Lena, it's been a while," I said, standing to give her a hug. We sat down and caught up on everything. She asked about my life, and I told her about my new job, about the apartment I had moved into, about the journey I had been on since graduation. It felt good to talk about everything I had been through, to finally share my story with someone who listened, who cared. That's amazing, Sarah, Lena said, her voice full of admiration. I always knew you were stronger than you gave yourself credit for. But that graduation speech? That was incredible. I laughed, a little self-consciously. Yeah, I think I shocked a lot of people that day. I'm proud of you, Lena said sincerely, not just for the speech, but for everything you've done. You didn't let them control you anymore. You took your life back. I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. It was the first time in a long time that someone had really seen me, really understood what I had been through. Thank you, I said softly, the words feeling like they didn't quite capture the depth of my gratitude. It's been hard, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. Lena smiled at me. You always were yourself, Sarah. You just had to find your way back to her. Her words stuck with me long after our conversation ended. She was right. I had always been myself. I just hadn't known it yet. But now, I was learning to embrace the woman I was becoming. I wasn't defined by the family who had ignored me, or by the expectations others had placed on me. I was Sarah Williams, and I was enough. The next few months were a mix of self-discovery and growth. I began to take more risks, both in my personal life and at work. I started to speak up more, to assert myself in ways I never had before. I found new passions, new things that excited me. I began to travel on weekends, exploring places I had only dreamed of visiting. It was as though the world had opened up to me, and I was no longer afraid to step into it. But no matter how much I grew, no matter how many accomplishments I ticked off my list, one thing remained constant. I still didn't reach out to my parents. It wasn't out of spite or anger. It was because I knew I had to build my own life without them. I needed to create my own version of happiness without relying on their approval. I needed to become whole on my own. And slowly but surely, I was doing just that. It had been nearly a year since I walked away from my family, and while I had made tremendous strides in building a life for myself, there were moments when I still wondered if I'd ever truly find peace. It wasn't just about moving forward in my career or becoming more confident. It was about the silent ache that lingered inside me. The ache of knowing that, while I had broken free from their control, the people who were supposed to love me were still out there, somewhere, living their lives without ever fully understanding who I had become. I was starting to believe that I didn't need them, that I could live my life entirely on my own terms. But just when I thought I had everything figured out, life had a way of throwing me a curveball. One Saturday afternoon, I was in a small bookstore I frequented, browsing through the travel section. I had been dreaming of taking a solo trip overseas, and I was researching destinations. I was lost in thought when I heard a voice behind me. Sarah? My heart skipped a beat. I turned around and froze. Standing there, looking as if he had just stepped out of one of my memories, was Jason. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It had been almost a year since graduation, and I hadn't heard from him since that day we met at the coffee shop. I had deliberately kept my distance, thinking that maybe I just needed more time to heal. But now there he was, right in front of me. Jason? I finally managed to say, my voice sounding much more surprised than I intended. He smiled, a mix of relief and nervousness in his eyes. I didn't think I'd actually find you here, he said softly. I've been trying to reach you. I felt a strange wave of emotions hit me. Part of me was angry that he was here, standing in front of me like everything was fine. Part of me was curious, wondering what had changed for him, and another part of me felt vulnerable. Seeing him brought up all the old memories, the old wounds. But I pushed that aside. I had come so far since that day at graduation. I wasn't about to let my guard down now. I've been busy, I said, keeping my voice even, though I could hear the tension in it. I haven't been answering your calls. Jason nodded, looking like he understood. I know, I wanted to talk to you, Sarah. I know I messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to try. I've been thinking about what you said. A lot. I studied him for a moment. He was still the same Jason I had always known. Charming. But now there was something different about him. There was a sincerity in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. I didn't know what to make of it. You've been thinking about it? I asked, my voice more skeptical than I intended. Yeah, he said, his voice quiet. And I realize I've been a jerk. Not just to you, but to everyone. I didn't understand how much you were carrying, how much you needed someone to see you. I'm sorry for that. I should have been there for you. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I didn't want to let him see how much his words were affecting me. It was hard to admit, but I had been longing for an apology like this. For so long, I had been waiting for Jason to finally get it, to finally understand what it had been like, for me. But even now, I wasn't sure if I could let myself believe it was real. Why now? I asked, my voice low. Why all of a sudden, after all this time? Jason looked down at his hands, his expression thoughtful. I don't know. Maybe I've just been realizing a lot of things about myself, about you, about how I treated you. I guess I was too focused on myself for too long. There was a long pause. I wasn't sure how to respond. Everything inside me wanted to say something, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much it had stung to see him and our parents so oblivious to my struggles, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that, deep down, I knew I didn't need him to fix anything for me anymore. You know, I said after a long moment, it's not just about the apology. It's about the years of not being seen, not being heard, the years of feeling invisible. And I don't want to go back to that. I understand, he said quietly. And I don't expect you to. But I do want to be part of your life again, Sarah. I want to be the brother I should have been. I want to support you the way I should have, from the beginning. I studied him again. This wasn't the same Jason I had known before. This wasn't the golden child who had gotten everything handed to him. He had grown up in ways I didn't expect, and for the first time, I could see a person who was truly sorry. Not just for what happened, but for the years he had spent being oblivious to the pain I had been carrying. I don't know what this looks like, I said slowly. I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off, but I'm willing to try. His face lit up. You are? I nodded. Yeah, I think I can try. For a brief moment, we stood there looking at each other, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could start over. Let's take it slow, I said. But I'm willing to give this a chance. Jason smiled, a real smile this time, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting the past. Maybe it was just about learning how to move forward, together, as two people who had been through a lot and were still trying to find their way. As we left the bookstore, walking side by side, it felt like the start of something new. I wasn't sure where it would go, but I knew one thing for sure. I had taken back control of my life, and no one could take that away from me. The weeks following my reunion with Jason were unexpected, to say the least. I had no idea how much I had been craving connection until I allowed myself to open up again, even just a little. It wasn't easy. I was used to keeping my emotions buried, to relying only on myself. But having Jason reach out, and the honesty in his apology, forced me to confront something I'd been running from, the possibility of healing the wounds in our relationship. We didn't talk every day, but we started texting now and then, checking in. It wasn't like the old times when we were constantly in each other's lives, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Jason was no longer the golden child in my eyes, nor was I the invisible one. We were both just two people trying to make sense of the past and build something different for the future. One evening, about a month after that first encounter at the bookstore, Jason invited me out for dinner. I hadn't seen him in person since our last meeting, and I was nervous. It felt like we were both treading lightly around the elephant in the room. What did it mean to have a relationship now? What did we owe each other after all the years of silence and distance? I agreed to meet him at a little restaurant downtown, one I had passed by a million times but never thought to try. As I walked into the cozy space, I saw Jason sitting at a corner table, a hesitant but hopeful smile on his face. He waved when he saw me, and for a second, it was like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew it was different. And that difference was the most important thing. "Hey," I said, sitting down across from him. "How have you been?" "Good," he replied, his eyes scanning me briefly before he looked away, like he was trying to figure me out. "Really good. It's different, but I'm getting there." I nodded, unsure of what to say. My relationship with Jason was so complicated, so tangled with years of resentment and unspoken words. But sitting here, across from him, it didn't feel like the same old sibling dynamic. There was something fresh about this encounter, something more mature, more honest. We ordered our food, and for a few moments the conversation was awkward, full of small talk, the kind that was meant to bridge a gap but never truly did. But then, Jason looked at me seriously, and I could see that he wanted to address what we had both been avoiding. "I know we're not going to fix everything overnight," he said quietly, his hands fiddling with the napkin in front of him. "But I just want you to know, Sarah. I want to be here for you. I want to be a better brother." I let his words settle. Part of me was still wary. How could I trust that this time would be different? How could I believe that he truly understood? But there was also a part of me that saw the sincerity in his eyes. He had made mistakes, yes, but he was trying to make up for them. "I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was," I replied slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But I think, for both of us, it's time to start fresh. We don't have to pretend like nothing happened, but we can decide what we want moving forward." Jason nodded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't the same as before, when I used to feel invisible, like I didn't matter. This time, there was respect. There was understanding. The evening passed without any major revelations, but that was okay. Sometimes, rebuilding relationships didn't require grand gestures. It just took time and small steps in the right direction. As we parted ways that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for Jason and me. Maybe there was a chance for me to have a family again, in a way that didn't involve holding on to old wounds or pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. Over the next few months, I started taking more risks in every aspect of my life. At work, I pushed myself harder, volunteering for bigger projects, making my voice heard in meetings. I was no longer afraid to take credit for my ideas or my work. I started traveling, visiting cities I had only dreamed about. I went to New York for a weekend, then to Chicago, just to see what it was like to experience something outside of my everyday life. The world felt wide open, and I was determined to explore it all. And then, there was the realization that I was no longer hiding behind the person I used to be. I was finally living authentically, in a way that felt true to who I was. I even started thinking about relationships in a different light. I had spent so much time focusing on the wrong things, on the past, on my family's approval, on feeling like I wasn't enough. But now I realized I could shape my future without waiting for anyone else to define it. Eventually, I heard from my mom again. She sent me an email, a long one, apologizing for everything. How she had failed to see me, how she had been so caught up in Jason's life that she had ignored mine. I read it, but I didn't respond immediately. It wasn't out of spite. It was because I realized something important. I had already forgiven her in my own way. The apology was important, but I didn't need it to move on. I had learned to forgive myself for the years I spent waiting for validation that would never come. And that was enough. As the months passed, I started to understand that healing was not a linear process. It wasn't something that could be rushed. There were still moments when I missed my family, when I wondered if they truly understood how much I had given up for their approval. But those moments didn't define me anymore. I was finally defining myself. The girl who had once been invisible was gone. In her place was someone new, stronger, more self-assured, and more willing to take risks. I had walked through fire to get here, and I wasn't turning back. And as I looked out at the horizon, the future no longer seemed uncertain. It was mine